We're on.
And we're live. Welcome to our very first episode of Tribe Talks. We're so excited to be here. My name is Sandy Golder, and we have today my beautiful business partner, Steph Wick. I think Steph.
Hello.
And Heather, who Steph is going to introduce you all to in a moment. So before we start, I really wanted to give you guys some context about why we created Tribe Talks and where this has all come from. So Tribe Talks is all about featuring stories of parents and carers of children with disabilities and medical conditions and different, maybe learning challenges. And we really want to not only bring awareness around these conditions, but give everyone an insight into what the day-to-day life looks like for these people and families. And in the process, create a more compassionate and caring and understanding world. So maybe a bit of a big vision, but that's what we're trying to do with Tribe Talks. So today, Steph is going to introduce you to our beautiful guest, Heather. So I'll hand over to Steph.
All right. So welcome, Heather. Guys, I'm so excited to have her with us today. When we were planning this, literally only a week ago, we were like, who could be someone who could really just like kickstart this process? And I thought of you straight away, Heather. You are such an ambassador for disability as a whole, and her beautiful, beautiful girl Ari has Sotos Syndrome. So I thought it's a really great opportunity for us to learn more about that and just to hear a bit about your journey. So please tell us more about yourself.
Sure. Oh, I'm excited to be part of it. Anything I can do to help rare families and people who are raising kids with a disability to feel less alone and more understood is always a good thing. I know all our journeys are slightly different. Mine started from birth, which has its pros and its cons. So I never had that feeling or that sort of honeymoon period of, normality, I guess. But straight after the birth, it was really obvious that there might be something going on with her. She had low blood sugars. So that was one of the first big things. They put her on a tube feed because of her low blood sugars. And then from there, we got transferred to Randwick because they just had some concerns about her overall. And funnily enough, when I was, she was quite a tall baby. She had a big head. Macrocephaly is the medical term. And so I was Googling that and I found Sotos Syndrome. So anyway, I got transferred to, I sort of saw a little bit of an intro video from a conference that they ran, and I was transferred to Randwick, and my daughter was looked at by several rounds of doctors who came through, noting her tone and her feeding. At that stage, she was put on a tube feed anyway, just to keep the blood sugars in check, because if they're too low, they can cause brain damage. So they really didn't want to play around with that. So we never really had a chance to check her feeding until later. But yeah, a geneticist came around, and I'll never forget, I said to him, I mean, look, I'm just a parent Googling, could it be Sotos Syndrome?
Yeah.
And he's like, definitely not Sotos Syndrome. You can take that one off your to-do list because it's definitely not that one. And I was like, okay, what do I know? I'm just a parent using Google for the first time looking for tall babies. So really just discounted that from the beginning. And we, went through by the time we'd left NICU, she did have feeding problems, and that was a very emotional journey, getting, grieving the experience of not being able to breastfeed my child, being told by nurses that she'd likely have a tube for life, that kind of thing. That they didn't know really anything about what her prognosis was because we didn't really have a diagnosis. And then about 8 to 12 doctors pulled us into a room and said, your daughter has septoptic dysplasia, which is a condition that will render a child to be legally blind, and it may come with a plethora of other things, but it's probably one of the better things to have. You're lucky. And I was like, okay. And of course I Googled that one and was like, ranges from mild to severe. And I said to the nurse, It ranges from mild to severe, and that's lucky. And she's like, oh, you'd never imagine, Heather, the cases that we see. So I think the fact that it wasn't life-limiting, it wasn't regressive, there could be a milder outcome. In the big scheme of what NICU doctors see, they considered that to be, a good thing. And then my geneticist came by and he said, look, I wouldn't be buying tickets to the conference for septal dysplasia just yet. And I said, well, is this diagnosis in question? He said, well, I'm not entirely convinced because it's not a genetic diagnosis. So I then went back to the nurse and said, is this diagnosis just a theory or is this what we've got? And she was like, well, no, this is a definite. So go home and live life checking, all the different things that come with that. So in that case, so I became an expert on this syndrome or condition, actually, that my daughter does not have. And then a few months later, after several visits to various different specialists, different areas, because once you leave NICU, once we got to go home, you get to be, you go in for all your checkups with your various different people that you need to. So we went and saw an eye specialist, and he said, actually, I thought she had low optic nerves, but actually I think I was wrong. I was reading it wrong. So I was like, well, okay. That was sort of a cornerstone part of the diagnosis and the key thing that made them think it must be septal dysplasia. So what does this now mean for septal dysplasia? And also, there's no growth issue with septal dysplasia. I still had this feeling like my daughter's growth was not what, she was like 75th percentile or something, not what me and my husband would naturally produce. So I still felt like that was part of the diagnosis. And then I went and saw endocrine, and they said, "Oh no, we don't think it's septic optic dysplasia. We don't think the cause of
how
low
confusing."
Yeah, so I was like, okay, so
at the beginning of that journey, just trying to process that and learn.
And also just that feeling of, okay, well, if it's not this, what's around the corner? And just sort of it was just
what's the unknown, isn't it?
Terrifying, because my daughter kept getting sick, and they kept using the term medically complex. And I've been a member of the a high care mums group for a while, and I just have so much respect for those parents, because we really did have our first year. She was high care. She was vomiting all the time, on a pump for continuous feeding, sleep apnea, blood sugar issues. We're seeing multiple departments. Every time we saw someone, there was something else added to her list of things. She had scoliosis, so we had to wear a brace for that, and still no underlying diagnosis. And she ended up having, at 13 months, fluid on the heart. So we nearly lost her because of that, and that just came out of the blue. So the first year with no diagnosis, all these things coming up, it was just terrifying. I was like, this is either going to get better and things are going to slowly improve, or maybe I'm looking at a life-limiting condition. Just all the things that go through your mind, And I was going, obviously through the grieving of, I didn't choose to be a special needs mum. What's this, what's this all about? And the why me's, the things that all of us have, or most of us go through in one way or another. You look back on in hindsight and feel differently, but at the time, I was a bit of a mess, and I'd never had any experience with disability at all. So I was not brought up, and many of us were not brought up in a very inclusive world. So we did not have people with disability going to school with us, or if we did, it might have been sort of seemed token. I remember having a boy with Down syndrome in one of the classes. It wasn't my class. I knew he was there. It was for a few months, and then he was put back into a special needs school. So that's sort of the environment that I grew up in. And I think, like many of us rare mums, we sort of, maybe I'm particularly ignorant, but we sort of knew that there was Down syndrome, that was a possibility. Maybe we heard of another couple of conditions, but we didn't know that there were like hundreds and thousands of genetic conditions out there that all have, a complete range of different things. So I sort of really relate now to the rare community, because our journeys can be, we have different things going on, but just being rare, there's something about not having your diagnosis very well understood by the medical community, having people, poke and prod your child. Often, because your child may have features in common with the syndrome, the first thing you hear from a doctor is that your child has dysmorphic features, which is just such a horrible word. And I always encourage doctors to just say your child has features in common with syndromes, or the word dysmorphic just seems, just not a nice word. I think it should be banned from the vocabulary. And doctors, my first year of life was very medical based, right? It was less about delays. There were delays, but it was more, and we were trying to do therapy, but the main focus was actually trying to keep my daughter healthy because she was losing weight rapidly. I felt like she didn't look like mine. She was very skinny, very tall, very hairy because she had to take these meds that made her really hairy. And, I was just trying to adjust to how different this path was to my first child. So it was, she didn't look like, mine in a way, because I had sort of had this idea in my head, my first child. But that went away as she grew, she gained weight, she looked more healthy. And now obviously she's a nice little combination of us and a few features of her condition as well.
I was just going to ask, so what does life for Ari look like today and for you?
Vastly different, thankfully. I'm very lucky in that we were one of the mums who, where she improved quite rapidly. So at 14 months, we sort of turned a corner and she started crawling. And then from that point on, because she used to be in hospital every time she had a cold, it would get nasty. And ended up having a G tube. So she had a tube in her tummy to be fed. And basically crawling seems to have been the turning point for her. Once she started crawling, she quickly sort of stood up and started cruising. So her development just sort of went whoosh. And, she was completely nonverbal at that point, didn't really babble at all. She didn't babble until she was 2. And then all of a sudden, through speech therapy, who sort of could see that some of her gesturing was quite age appropriate. They had a lot of faith that she would be, do quite well. Then she started talking in sentences. By 2.5, she was talking in 2 to 3 word sentences. And now that she's 4, she's pretty much, I would say, like the low end of average for speech for her age, which is just amazing, because even for her diagnosis, which we got at 20 months, and the geneticist sort of, tail between his legs came to me and said,
all of that,
it might have been a bit of an easier journey if I'd actually, if we'd looked at that. But look, in hindsight, that's the thing with rare conditions, is that, a lot of the time the geneticists don't. No one knows, because it's finding a needle in a haystack.
Can we touch on that? Can we touch on that unknown bit just for a second? Because I think it's something that everybody can relate to at the moment in the current climate of COVID-19, and everyone has been thrust into this world of unknown, but you've lived there for a very long time, right?
Yes.
So, how did you manage every day just being an unknown? I know when I had a health episode 6 months before I was diagnosed with MS, and I had 6 months of feeling like a walking time bomb. And it's sort of like I felt like I was constantly waiting for something to happen. I don't know if you can relate to that, but how did you handle the unknown?
Not great to start with. When I was in NICU, I was bawling my eyes out every day. I was, the social workers would have to come and talk to me, and they put me onto a counsellor, and honestly, it didn't help me at all, because she had no experience with dealing with parents who'd been through anything similar to mine. So, or maybe it just helped to cry a lot. But I don't know. Sometimes I feel like you just have to go through a period of sadness and just go through those emotions. And there were a lot of things that could have made my journey a bit easier, but no one did anything on purpose to try and make my journey hard. So it's just sometimes it's the nature of a rare condition that You know, the journey, because the medical knowledge is not there, the journey can be a harder one for discovery. But yes, living with fear was definitely something, even when I got a diagnosis, because I'm sure that you felt the same way when you got your diagnosis, Sandy, for both yourself and your daughter, that you know that there's a range of possible outcomes from that diagnosis, but you don't really know where that's going. And you can become hyper-focused on projecting all these different scenarios. And that's probably the one piece of advice I give parents early on, that they've just had a diagnosis or they don't know, is to try just not to project all the different outcomes, because you know, I would never have imagined that my daughter would be doing as well as she is today. But even if she wasn't, it wouldn't necessarily help me to know that in advance, I don't think. It's like
I
one of the
totally
best
agree.
pieces of advice that a psychologist gave me once, actually before even I had a child with special needs or disability, was that she said to me, "Do you know what you're going to die of?" And I said, "Well, no." And she said, "Do you want to know?" And I'm like, "Probably not, because if you knew, you just spend your whole life thinking about that. If you can't do anything to, you know, like if I knew that, say at 60, I'm going to get hit by a car and that's my lot, right? It wouldn't help me to know that now." So it was sort of a big thing. It made me think, yeah, actually, sometimes it really doesn't help to know bad things in advance. Like it's probably better to just live today and just, you know, if you can't do anything to prevent it, you know, I don't know where my daughter, I still don't fully know where she lies in terms of her capabilities, but, you know, I have more of an idea at 4 certainly than I did back then. But, you know, sometimes I don't really want all the concrete answers. Like, you know, I can, you know, obviously I think, well, she's independent, what level of independence, you know, what's her cue, blah, 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 blah. I've sort of put off having a developmental assessment as well, partly because I don't really want the predictions that sometimes come with these things. So I've sort of learned actually that I prefer to live in the unknown.
I feel this. That came up for us a little while ago, and it was like, right, developmental assessment, here we go. And I was like, "Ooh, why is this not sitting well with me? Like, I don't need to know that right now." She's great. We can do it. Like, it's confronting.
Especially when you get to a good place.
Line. Yeah, I think my GP said to me, "Don't go and fall down the Google hole," like when I was diagnosed, and same with Emmy. And I think I love to have a baseline of information, so I grasp the concept, and I suppose that's what these calls are about too, like giving people like an overview of all these different conditions and disabilities. But there's so much information online that doesn't apply, that you can really wind yourself up and start almost creating like anxiety where there may not need to be any, right? Exactly what you've said, like our kids will be our kids, and I prefer to deal with the day-to-day than the what ifs, I suppose, and control what I can control. So, you know, we can control what we eat, we can control the therapies, and I love being in action like that. It makes me feel productive. So, you know, I think that's really...
Focus on what we can do. And at the end of the day, I can do early intervention to help give my daughter the best outcome. None of us have a crystal ball anyway, so any predictions are pretty, like, are always subject to change, right? Whereas, you know, I don't really like it when doctors give lots of predictions for parents, because I think the way it's delivered anyway needs to be important to say, look, this is the range of outcomes that we know of your condition at this point in time with the medical science we have today. Who knows what's happening? There could be cures for some of the worst conditions. Maybe there'll be a cure one day for Sotos Syndrome and I won't even want it, because I'll be like, you know what, my daughter's doing great and she's amazing and she doesn't, you know, life is, she's perfect as
Someone
she is.
just said in the chat, also with rare conditions, they make predictions based on what they know, but they don't know anything about the rare conditions. And
exactly.
And I often say this to people, doctors are just humans, right? They're just making their best guess on the information that they've got at the time.
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's why I say I don't really blame the doctors for the situation being hard for me initially. I just feel like that's sort of part of the rare journey. And I really hope that it gets easier for parents as more knowledge, you know, we get quicker at diagnosing. It's important to know some of these things up front, because if you can do something about it, like you can get therapy early. Or I actually have a friend who has a rare child, and she seemed quite affected by whatever she had. Turned out it was a metabolic condition, and there's actually a drug that she could take that has actually vastly improved her outcome, that she will likely have a typical life to the most part. She will need therapy, but she will, her prognosis is amazing now, and because they have a treatment for this condition. But for the vast majority of rare cases, it's the same treatment that, say, you would have for autism or OT, speech, PT.
Well, can we get into that? Sorry, I think there's a delay. I keep trying to ask a question on my so in the spirit of like getting that overview of these main features, so what are like the top 3 things you would love people to know about Sotos?
Okay, I think it's important to understand that Sotos is like any condition, like Down syndrome or any developmental delayed condition, or autism, or any condition, that there is a range of outcomes. So there are kids or adults with Sotos syndrome living independent lives. Some of them don't even know they have Sotos until they have a child with Sotos syndrome. And then the child might have some health difficulties, or the fact is we're keeping a closer eye on kids these days, so things get picked up quicker. So that might then turn the parents to get tested, and then, dad's got Sotos syndrome. So it's a 50%, if an adult has Sotos syndrome, they've got 50% chance of passing it on. The other thing is, obviously, there's the height thing, and that's the thing that's probably the most obvious with my daughter. So there's 2 types of Sotos syndrome. There's or 2 broad categories, I guess. There's the mutation and the deletion. And a deletion would actually be often picked up in a microarray, which is the standard genetic, the first test that they do. And she doesn't have that. So they screened for that. And that's another reason why they thought not Sotos syndrome, because the deletion would have been picked up. She actually has a mutation, which is just like a jumbling of letters at a particular point. And that needs, we did a macrocephaly panel to get to that diagnosis. But basically, it's a change of the NSD1, and for my daughter, for the kids with the mutation in particular, sometimes with deletion too, but broadly speaking, the growth is the biggest thing. So they just look older. So my daughter is 4, but she's the size of a 6.5-year-old, and she's like my other daughter's 7, so she's like just a little bit smaller than her, and she's basically like a very large 4-year-old. And I would say that sort of 90% of her is sort of typical, and then 10% of her is, her condition. And when she was younger, I would have said probably 90% of her is her condition and 10%. So, she's caught up in a lot of areas, but she's still different. And I think the reason that she comes across as different is because, the physical features, the fact that she's so tall. She can come across as a little clumsy, and that's just because she has delayed growth motor skills. And if you can imagine, basically your bone growth is a 6.5-year-old, and your muscle tone is not even a 4-year-old, so 3.5-year-old maybe. So that's why she comes across as like slightly awkward, clumsy, maybe sometimes. And so there's that type of thing. She's got some sensory stuff going on. 80% of kids with Sotos syndrome, a study showed, actually have autism to some degree. So there are Sotos kids that are completely on the more severe side of the autism spectrum, who perhaps nonverbal, stim a lot, very rigid in their in some of their behaviors and so forth. And there are other kids who are more like who are quite verbal, who some of them are quite bright at school, rarely the gifted side, but doing really well at school, but still have traits of autism, and so that can also vary a lot. Some people will get a diagnosis of autism, and some won't. And my daughter, she's certainly not classically. I don't know if there's a classic. Sorry if I'm going to offend people with autism, because my understanding there is not as much.
We're all good.
But in terms of, there's nothing really obvious like about autism about my child, but she does have a few sensory things. So she's sensory seeking and tactile defensive. I think Steph said the same thing with her daughter, like always wanting to wear like a lot of clothes, even in the summer. So my daughter used to be like that, and then just in time for winter has decided that she doesn't mind short t-shirts and short shorts.
Oh, Emmy's doing that right now. Oh God,
I'm like, what is going on?
You know, there are that I really relate to, but then there are other things that, you know, my daughter is definitely you know, doesn't have. So she's quite good with change, for example, which is, you know, she doesn't mind if whatever we do that day, and I don't have issues with her. But she can be quite she's a little bit particular, so she can be quite OCD, which is sort of a thing that can come with Sotos too. But I don't know. Again, we don't really have the full picture of her yet. She's only 4. And then ADHD is quite common as well, variants of that in Sotos. So, you know, and then obviously there's the level of delay. So, but a lot of kids with Sotos will defy expectations, because unlike a lot of conditions where the gap gets bigger as they get older, a lot of people with Sotos, by the time that they're an adult, they actually have an IQ in the normal range. And so there's a lot of things that can actually improve. So it's quite unique. And sometimes when I'm talking to therapists, you know, for the first time, I have to explain, you know, what to expect from her is maybe more improvements than you might see with other kids with delays, more broadly. So, but that's not, again, some Sotos mums would be really angry with me say that, because they'd be like, well, that's not our story. But, you know, they are all different, of course. But my daughter does thankfully seem to be in that milder end of things.
Yeah, so, absolutely. So what, like, I guess one of our biggest things, and maybe like one of the main reasons for us creating Tribe Talk, is that like we want this to be something so that people within our community can understand, you know, not just autism, that there's many other different types of situations and journeys going on. So education for our community, but also for the wider community. So a lot of the time, like I know, even though with my beautiful family or, you know, friendship groups that love my daughter, they love me, but they don't know how to help, right? And that's understandable, because they're not walking this journey. So what would be the main thing that you would want people to know? Normal families, it's not a real thing, but like what would you want the wider community to know, to be able to, I suppose, understand and assist you and Ari and your family as a whole moving forward?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the first things that come to mind is, I think you brought it up in a post the other day, Stephanie, is that just to remove the term normal from your vocabulary.
Totally. That's why I'm like, normal. What is it?
That's right. Like, you know, and just embrace diversity. And I'm just for diversity, full stop. So that doesn't matter if it's, you know, racial families, different makeups of families, different lifestyles, you know, just the world does not have to be cookie cutter. And our kids, especially kids with, you know, rare conditions who might have features that are, you know, that stand out, you know, they're all beautiful in their own way. And I always say, like, especially with, say, the medical community, I was like, when you see a child, the first thing you should say to the parent is find something that's beautiful about that child and mention that first. Start with that. And you'll find the parents that on side, and, you know, rather than sort of going immediately to the you know, what the medical community see as deficits, go to say something like, oh, your child has beautiful hair, or I love her eyes. And then, you know, just see them as a child first. And then once that's broken down, the parent will trust that, you know, you don't see the child as, you know, just something medical. Then you humanize that child. Then we can move forward to more openly talking about the challenges, I guess. So yeah, start with the positives and then move to the challenges later. And maybe that's the same with the community. Like, and definitely do not say I'm sorry. If someone, that's just the worst thing. I think for me, I hate it if someone says, if I say, oh, I've got a child with a disability, oh, I'm sorry. Like, don't be sorry. You know, like, because it's sort of a judgment in a way that that's something less, that experience is something less than, and that's something to be pitied. And it's just not the case. You know, I might have felt that early on. I mean, from the medical point of view, I'm sorry your child has to wear a brace for her childhood, which she doesn't in her case. She has the scoliosis, but you know, not my child is, you know, obviously like any child is a gift. So
it's awesome. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Things that come to mind.
Oh, Coco. Oh, her sound's cut out.
Can you hear me?
No, I just muted because Coco is like barking really loudly.
All right.
Sorry, it's all happening here. It's still online learning at home, so it's actually been quite quiet. I'm surprised that I haven't.
I know.
I've got Erica downstairs doing her schoolwork, so I got my my oldest homeschooling last day. Woo!
No, it's tricky. I actually just wrote your quote down because I want to, when we promote this, put it on there. Embrace diversity. The world does not need to be cookie cutter. I just think that's really like the perfect quote. I know.
And I've been following. Actually, another thing that people with typical kids can do is like educate yourself by following some of these great resources out there. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen Dylan Alcott's podcast, and he's doing a lot of work in educating typical people about what it's like to live with a disability. And listening to adults with a disability I found really helpful. So I follow a lot of adults. And I know that one of the things that, I follow Carly Finley's one. She talks about, embracing her community of people with a disability. And, as my daughter grows up, I want her to feel proud that she has a disability. And, in a way, I can sort of relate to mums who've got kids with, say, dwarfism, because although my daughter's the complete opposite side of things, she'll be very tall, likely, although it does slow down to a more typical height as well as she gets older. But that's sort of the fact that your child's different. But I found it interesting because generally speaking, people who are not rude would not go up to someone with dwarfism and say, "Oh, you're really short." But people will often come to me and go, "Oh, your daughter's really tall," and they don't kind of realize that sort of that I might be sensitive to that. But it's sort of it's interesting to me anyway. But be aware that things come in beautiful sizes.
Exactly. And I think as parents, or even not as parents, as humans, our actions can set such a positive example for the people that are around us. So if we naturally get into this flow of anyone that we meet, recognizing what's beautiful about them first before any other judgment, right? Why don't we just employ that as an everyday action with anyone that we meet?
I actually really love that, because that's really practical. That's something any human, even if you remove disability from it, can just do. Like, what a beautiful way to live.
One of my mentors said years ago, meet everybody like they're your best friend. Like, how would you greet your best friend? Like, if we did that, imagine how much more of a beautiful place the world would be.
That's true. I remember something that the other thing is about questions, because it's a very like, not everyone feels the same way about being asked questions, and I don't mind. Like, there are certain questions that like I love. Like, if a child asks a question, like remember a child swimming with Ari, and she was probably about 6 or 7, and she was she just kind of kept looking at Ari, and I could tell she was thinking, what's different about her? And but in an innocent way, certainly in no judgy sort of a way, like with a smile on her face and everything. And she sort of said to me, "How old is your daughter?" And and she's I think she was 3 at the time. She's 3, but she has an overgrowth condition that makes her really tall. And she just went, "Okay," and just kept swimming. And I just thought that's how adults should be. And that's the kind of response I want from adults. But also, don't necessarily assume that if you see a child with a disability and the parents that they want to talk about it, because some do and some don't. And I think it's really important just to talk to them first and then sort of gauge if you are curious. But just bear in mind as well, like Carly Finley talks about on her Facebook page, is that she gets asked millions of times when she's out and about her skin condition, and she's like, well, if it's just 1 or 2 people, maybe that would be okay, but I get asked on a regular basis all the time, and it's exhausting, and I don't have to explain my medical history to you guys. And I thought that's so true. Like, as a parent as well, if you have a child that does not fit the norm, you don't want to be asked 20 times a day, especially if some people say, "What's wrong with your child?" or something like that. I mean, I don't get that now, but she tends to blend in a bit. But early on, when she had a tube in her nose, I would get that type of thing. And, you know, you just got to be sensitive and maybe, start the conversation with, start to get to know someone before you ask personal questions about them, I think is probably a general rule we should all, you know, take by. And it also, the parent will often bring it up if they want to talk. Like, I will often just, you know, if I think it's like the elephant in the room, I'll just bring it up and say, and mention my story. But, that's my view. Some people probably prefer, I mean, questions over stares, of course, but just something to bear in mind.
Exactly. Oh, I've loved having you on today, Heather, and hearing your insights. It's been wonderful.
No problem. It's just my worldview on the whole thing, and you know, everyone's different, but
that's the beauty of these talks. That's what we want to do, like create a space where these conversations can be had and not have to worry about the political correctness so much, but let's just have a bit of real talk and raise some awareness so that everybody can, you know, understand and have a bit more compassion.
That's right. Well, thanks guys for all you do.
Oh, you're awesome, Heather.
It's great. And, you know, I think it's great that parents have a place to go, that they can, you know, share their journeys and feel understood. And, you know, let's try and, like you say, the statistics around carers are pretty grim overall. So anything we can do to sort of make parents feel more supported, you know, is a great thing. So thanks for all you guys do too.
Thank you. There's some love for you in the comments too. Michelle says your view matters with a love heart. I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
All right. So, well, that was episode number 1. Our goal is to do one of these a week. So I don't know who's scheduled for next week because Steph takes care of that. These cameras go the opposite way. So do you know who's up next week, Steph? Do you remember who's on the schedule?
We need to reconfirm, but we'll announce it in the next couple of days and pop it on the page for you guys. So you know what's coming. We can't
wait. If you're a visitor checking us out on YouTube, make sure you like us on Facebook at Thrive Tribe & Co. And we also have a community support group called Thrive Tribe & Co Connect. Request to join and we will get you in there. But thank you for joining us for our first episode, guys.
All right. Bye, guys. See ya.